this off. We've got so much juicy content. Kat, don't be shy. Come on down if you want to come on the stage or hang around as my partner in crime. Where has she gone? She's disappeared for the moment. But Tony, if you didn't catch that, we're ready to go live. And Donna, thanks for your help with the slides. This is the Educators in VR September edition. We were here about a month ago talking about Russia's focus on how one might learn or teach a foreign language. And I think what you're noticing from these events and many of the events across the spectrum of the educators in VR community is that actually, yes, we might be talking about research or STEM or languages, but there's this kind of mishmash, this dissemination from one idea to another, this cross-fertilization, if you want to call it like that, contamination of ideas. There we go. And this is exactly what it's all about, because Cassie is with us today. And I'm not even going to introduce you because you've got such a great profile. Like, you need to be the one introducing yourself. Cassie, I'm going to hand over the reins to you. Can we give a round of applause for our special guest today, who's going to get a bit deeper into the cognitive aspects of reading in particular and learning a language. So a big round of applause for Cassie. Off you go.
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Cassie Eng, and currently I'm a Ph.D. candidate at Carnegie Mellon University. So my training is in two distinct but complementary areas. One is in the learning sciences and the other is in cognitive neuroscience. And today I'm going to share with you how we can employ the neuroscience of learning theories to create more effective VR and AR, XR experiences.
Donna, you there?
Okay, so there are three objectives to this talk, and they primarily focus on three theory-driven studies. One is on digital books for pre-readers. The second is on digital books for beginning readers. And the last part focuses on digital games for cognitive skills that are predictive of language development. So this is mostly to connect education in the brain, so how we can use cognitive psychology in combination with neuroimaging and eye tracking, which can allow us to see how XR experiences actually alter not only our cognitive processes, but actually brain development. So learning to read is crucial to actually function in everyday society. So poor reading skills actually predicts not only the likelihood of dropping out of school, but also later substance abuse and even socioeconomic skills such as interacting with peers. Yet only 34% of students are actually reading at grade level by the 8th grade. So there are several things that affects the acquisition of reading skills. So this could just be neurodevelopmental disorders, okay, wait, I'm sorry. Someone is standing right in the middle of the slides. Classmates. So this is a longitudinal study following thousands of children. And what you can see is that teachers who rated children in kindergarten as having the lowest attentional control actually had the poorest reading skills, and following them into the 2nd grade, this pattern is consistent with development. So there's a very widely known term as the 30 million word gap. And what this is saying is that children who grow up in poverty are actually exposed to 30 million less words compared to other children. While this research is really astounding, it is a little bit misleading because it's saying that the quantity is what matters, but current research is showing that it's actually the quality of content that actually is the most predictive of later language development, not just the quantity of words children are actually exposed to. So when I say quality, what I'm talking about is quality interactions that children have during reading experiences. So something that adults will do to guide children's attention is pointing to illustrations that actually matches the text. So if a child, for example, says car, an adult reading with them will actually point to the car. mainly focusing children's attention to appropriate content. But now we're not only living in a digital age where it's no longer just traditional hard copy books, but children are exposed to ebooks. And not only are they exposed to ebooks, but they're actually even exposed to ebooks alone. Studies find that children, especially even in low socioeconomic households, they're actually even more likely to be handed a tablet to keep them occupied. So the media is filled with stories about how technology, the use of technology, and having a negative effect on children's attention and brain development. But the reality is we need more evidence-based research. So this is especially important because 80% of the top-selling apps in the education category target children. And on average, children ages 2 to 8 spend nearly almost 3 hours daily with screen media. And 98% of children actually do have access to a mobile device. It is just as frequent as having a TV in the home. And not only that, but you can see the growth in ebook sales for e-learning has grown 93% since 2015. So given that we know these individual differences in attention exist, and they do affect later reading development, the question is, can we design edtech materials knowing about these individual differences? So several existing ebook designs have pictures, and pictures are very important, right? They establish the setting, they define characters, they develop the plot, but what they also do is they also integrate these very colorful, entertaining, extraneous illustrations. So, for example, in this bottom picture, what you'll see is Alfie the alligator's mom is making cookies. But what you'll also see are these colorful cars. And if you actually read the text, there's nothing to do with cars in the narrative. So children's attention regulation is still developing when they're becoming readers. So the question is, do these illustrations actually hinder not only children's attention, but does it actually affect their later learning? So the first study that I conducted was with 90 children ages 3 to 5 years old. So these are pre-readers. And what I did is I designed an attention-focused book, meaning that when children say certain content, set it to just a static digital book. And what was found is that children did learn significantly more in this attention-focused book compared to just a digital book. So we can eliminate that. It's just this novelty effect of technology. But importantly, so children were actually administered an independent measure of attention and also an independent measure of verbal ability at this age. And to see how much children actually gained from reading in this attention book, I took their comprehension scores reading in these control condition books, so the traditional board book and also the static digital book, to see how much they gained from reading in this attention book condition. And what was found is that the children who gained the most from this condition are the ones who scored the lowest on this independent measure of attention. So it's showing that this book is especially useful for children with poor attention regulation skills.
Cassie, sorry to interrupt there. Could you just look to your bottom right? You'll see host tools.
Yeah.
And if you click, excellent. I think you're on megaphone now. Amplify my voice. Yes, you are. Perfect. Carry on.
Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So the second study, oh, there's an echo now. How do I do this?
We need to mute some people from the mute room. That's not your
Okay,
don't worry.
that works.
2 seconds. Great.
Okay, Michael, can you still hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So this second study is kind of a replication study. So in the first study, what happened is the relevant content actually popped out children from all of the other extraneous content. This study was different in that instead of having the animations pop out, I just systematically removed all extraneous content. And while children were reading in these conditions, an eye tracker was actually following their eye patterns to see where they're allocating their attention. And what was found is that children learn significantly more in this streamlined version where all the extraneous details were removed compared to this standard commercially available condition where extraneous and relevant illustrations were intermixed. And so in order to look at children's eye gaze patterns, I created what's known as areas of interest over the text, relevant illustrations, and also extraneous illustrations. And so what was found is that children looked away from the text almost twice as much in the commercially available standard book condition relative to the streamlined condition and where all the extraneous details were removed. And so similar to the first study, the question is like, is this streamlined condition especially useful for children who get distracted while reading? So I took their standard comprehension scores and I subtracted that from their streamlined comprehension scores. And this gave a proxy of how much they actually benefited from the streamlined condition. And what was found is that children who gain the most from this streamlined book condition are the ones who consistently looked away from the text while they were reading. In other words, they were the children who were the most distracted while they were reading. So we know from these first two studies that we can develop educational technology to enhance reading skills that are especially useful for children with poor attention through evidence-based designs. So now the question is, can we actually enhance the development of attention itself through AR, VR, XR experiences? To study this question, attention actually falls under an umbrella term of something called executive function, which are cognitive processes that subserve goal-directed behaviors. So this is like planning, multitasking, organizing, and executive function not only predicts later academic achievement, reading skills, but also substance abuse, delinquency, the likelihood of committing a crime, and even occupational success. So there are longitudinal studies that actually follow children from the age of 3 until adulthood and find that children with lower executive function not only exhibit lower academic achievement and reading skills, but also poor health, earn less, and even commit more crimes, controlling for things like IQ and socioeconomic status. So there are several brain game apps that attempt to train executive function, but what they find is there's no transfer. So it helps on the trained tasks, but there's no transfer. It doesn't generalize to the real world. But interestingly, in the kinesiology and neuroscience literature, what they're finding is that exercise, so this combination of physical activity and cognitive stimulation through exergame, these physically active games that actually requires people to move their bodies in the interface, improves executive function. But there's little to no research on children at a very young age, and we know that executive function is linked to classroom behavior and attention regulation, which are particularly important for school readiness and success. So implementing an exergame early on in development is a really important question to start studying. So in order to do this, I took a widely known executive function task known as the flanker task. So what this task does is it presents 5 arrows in a row. For children, it's in the form of a fish. And there's both congruent trials where all the fish are facing the same direction and incongruent trials where that center target fish is actually facing the opposite direction. And the goal is for children to push an arrow key in the direction of that center task. So this attention task is actually difficult for both children and adults because you have to narrowly focus on the center target while ignoring all the distracting information on the side. So I turned this into an immersive game by adding a narrative. So children actually imagine that they're on a quest. Player feedback, and this was actually quite difficult because this was with children ages 4 to 5 years old and they don't know how to read yet. So when you typically design games, usually users can read directions and follow those directions, but in this sense, it needed to be all auditory or visual. So for positive rewards to advance in the games, children actually got treasures. And if they took too long or moved in the wrong direction, then a competitor would actually swoop in and grab their rewards. And also player progress. So as children progress throughout the game, in the jar on the side, they would actually see their progress get higher. And that's how they knew they were progressing throughout the game. So along with all of the game interface features that I talked about in the previous slides, something that's important is the use of machine learning. So something that's important in developmental research is to always keep students what's known in the zone of optimal development, meaning that the most optimal learning environments are going to be neither too difficult nor too simple and boring. Children have to be in this area where they're challenged optimally. So when children were getting more trials correct, it would actually get harder. And as it got incorrect or would go in the wrong direction, it would actually slow down and actually adapt to their individual capabilities. And what this trend into exergame is it was projected onto a wall with a connected game mat, so they were actually immersed in the environment. And so children were given 3 executive function assessments and neuroimaging at pretest, and then assigned to either an activity group, which was this combined cognitive and physical activity, a cognitive group where it was the exact same game as the game, and an exercise group, which was the exact same game as the exergame, except no distracting fish on the side. And then also, which is developmental research, a typically developing control group who's just experiencing typical development. After that, they were administered the 3 executive function assessments and also neuroimaging. So the pre-test and post-test outcome measures was the trained flanker task, a transfer day-night task. So this is also a widely used standardized executive function task in which when children see a picture of a sun, they have to say day. When they see a picture of a moon card, they have to say night. And then the rules switch on them. So when they see a sun card, they have to say night. And when they say moon card, they have to say day. So they actually have to switch, multitask, and it requires a lot of attentional focus. Teachers are also are given a clinical assessment of children's executive function behaviors in the classroom. And prefrontal cortex connectivity is actually measured using functional near-infrared spectroscopy, also known as FNIRS. So FNIRS actually revolutionized the field because it measures changes in blood oxygenation and volume by imaging the brain with low levels of light. So it's exactly what fMRI measures, but the difference is that children don't need to remain mobile and still, and it's less sensitive to motion artifacts like EEG. So it's incredibly useful for research with children. So just like I explained before, NIRS is non-invasive. It's less sensitive to motion artifacts. So when participants are in EEG, which actually looks at the firing of neurons, you actually have to remove every single eye blink and every single muscle movement, which you can imagine is incredibly difficult and challenging with children who are very wiggly. And same thing with fMRI, where you actually have to, you're in a scanner in a very confined and claustrophobic environment is also not child-friendly. So that's what makes NIRS optimal for neuroimaging. So something that I would like to emphasize is that the brain is adaptable. So there's something known as activity-induced plasticity. So it's when the brain actually strengthens connections driven in part by children's experiences. So the brain can't repair damaged neurons, but it can restore neurons, and it can form new connections, reorganize and reassign brain areas to new functions. So one of these examples is when you have seizures, one of the practices to reduce those seizures is to actually perform lobectomies. So this 6-year-old, this is a procedure that was done on her, but what you can see is that she is highly functioning even after this lobectomy, in part because of neuroplasticity. The brain can actually grow and change due to children's experiences. So what you'll find here is that the brain with no with no label is actually the exercise group. But what you see here is the exergame, the group that was exposed to both physical activity and cognitive stimulation, are the ones that showed evidence of neuroplasticity, that is the building of new brain connections after the exergame intervention. And what you'll find here is that, so the only group that actually improved performance on the transfer executive function test was the exergame group. And teachers who were blind to the conditions, meaning they had no idea which condition children actually participated in, teachers rated the children in the exergame group, their behavior in the classroom, as better compared to all the other control groups. So currently, what I'm working on is a study that's examining, will these effects actually transfer to another virtual context and also across development. So this is with a low-income youth, ages 13 to 15, using a commercially available popular virtual reality game, also known as Beat Saber. So I have an exercise condition where it's just typical Beat Saber, where you are hitting blocks in the direction of arrows. An exergame version where the cognitive engagement is higher, meaning there's actually a rule switch. So between songs, children are actually told to hit blocks in the opposite direction. So similar to the flanker task, they have to override this prepotent response of directionality. Then I also have a cognitive condition where it's the same thing as the exergame, except that they're sitting, and then a control group where they're not only sitting, but they're also hitting the arrows in the same direction. So there's no mixed rule. So in summary, when well-developed and deployed, technology can support both the reading and attention skills and pre and beginning readers. And I think something to just take into account is this idea of keeping it simple. So a lot of designers will try to make certain materials that they think will be the most fun and entertaining for children. What I found actually interacting with them is that when you give them so much over simulation, so much stimuli, is that it's incredibly distracting. And the children who struggle the most are the ones who have difficulties regulating their attention. So when you're creating virtual environments, when you're creating digital storytelling, just taking into account that there are these developmental implications of children and their attention skills. And it can also support the cognitive development and also increases neuroplasticity. And this is actually really important and relevant right now because 164 million people in the United States actively play video games. That's roughly half the population. And 74% of parents actually believe that video games can be educational for their children. Some more well-controlled studies on how we can actually use this to enrich the experiences children have with technology are needed. So there's something known as the Matthews effect. Children who are already at an accumulated advantage, that is, they already have access to lots of learning materials, lots of quality educators, they're already at an advantage. So if we're already giving educational interventions to these children who are already at an advantage, they're just going to move forward and continue to widen this achievement gap. But what you'll see here is that children's reading skills, when you look at low socioeconomic to high socioeconomic, the high socioeconomic children are at a head start. And same thing with attention regulation. Children who grew up in high socioeconomic households are already at a head start. So that's why it's really important that when you're designing educational materials, that you're actually giving it to children and students who will benefit the most, so we don't continue this Matthews effect that continues to plague a lot of academic and research settings. And lastly, so something that's important about doing this rigorous research is community outreach. So something that I've been working on is with Dr. Heather Joseph. She's a clinical psychiatrist who works with children at risk for ADHD. So these types of interventions might be especially useful for those children. I'm also working with Mr. Powell. So he is the principal of Propel Homestead in Pittsburgh, where 98% of children are on free and reduced price lunch. And the majority of children are also underrepresented minority children who would need access to safe recreational equipment and experiences that are going to enrich both their reading and cognitive development. And I'm also working with Dr. Karen Alexander. So she actually is the founder of XR Connected, and over the summer we developed evidence-based online curriculums for underserved children that actually uses XR to promote both physical activity and embodiment while learning. This is particularly timely and important because in the global pandemic, educators and parents across the nation are attempting to find ways not only to keep children cognitively engaged, but also physically active. And there are reports of not only neurological manifestations due to COVID-19, but also children are going to need these types of materials that are going to promote health benefits, that's going to boost their immune systems. So finally, I would just like to thank the Army that made this research possible. So the 8 game designers, the 10 experienced research assistants who helped collect all this data, my advisors, Anna Fisher and Eric Thiessen, Professor Sarah Pickett, who actually composed all the music and sound effects for this type of technology, and finally the Children's School at Carnegie Mellon who made this possible, and the Institute of Education Sciences for funding this research. And finally, I just want to say thank you so much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Let's get not one, but 2 rounds of applause. The first one for that pretty damn good presentation. The first one. And the second one for actually the work that you're doing with the underprivileged communities in taking what you're doing with your research in the labs with the academic community and trying to spread the love as well, because there's an awful lot of technology out there and great developments, evolution in what we're using, but actually to think of people that are actually being ignored on the fringes of society is a beautiful thing. So that's the second round of applause for you today, Cassie. We're going to open up the floor to questions. And does anybody want to fire away? Actually, let's turn them on. I'm going to go to the host panel, and in 2 seconds, you're going to see, there you go, a little hand appear, bottom right corner of your screen. If you want to click that, if you have any questions for Cassie about anything she's discovered, I know I've got a few, and I'll try and keep it within 25 minutes because there's so much to get our teams into. But any questions coming on? As we wait for the questions to come through, please click that raise hand button. Cassie, I think one thing that you touched on was really, really interesting is, kind of the design of educational technology to, kind of research-based and make sure that actually you're not overexposing or overstimulating children to too many stimulus, in order to actually get them focusing on the text. I think the beautiful thing about what you're doing, and I'm interested to see if it's kind of crossed your mind, but actually it's away from the technology. Much of what you've spoken about can be applied simply to an adult sitting in the bedroom of their child with a book in their hands, or thinking about what story to share with their child at the end of a busy working day, for example, and just get them actually approaching the text in a slightly different way, rather than just saying, here's a book, read it, and assuming that because you're reading, that's a good thing in and of itself. It's not necessarily the case, is it?
Yeah, there's actually some pretty amazing studies that shows they're just looking at quality adult-child interactions during shared book reading experiences. What they found is that the children who learn the most and actually develop the best language development skills, they have caregivers who will guide their attention to the appropriate content. So a lot of my research is under the assumption that when children are exposed to these materials, that they might be alone, that they might not have that guidance, especially if you're an educator, one educator, 35 children, it's going to be really hard to monitor and help all of them. But I completely agree with you, just thinking about hard copy books in general, like are those designed appropriately?
Yeah, really nice. We've got a question that did come through and it seems to have fizzled out, but Modern Chaos, are you there? Do you want to fire away? If you do, Modern Chaos, please click that raise hand button and we can come straight back to you again and give you the mic. Are you there? If anybody else has any other questions. I know as well that there are a few language teachers in the room. We've got Kat. Kat, if you want to come on down, don't be shy. This is my much more intelligent than me partner in crime on the vLanguage track at the Educating VR community. And she's being very shy. Come on. I know you've got a few questions that you might want to pose to Cassie. Nadia, you're there. Where are you, Nadia? Did I see you in Russia? Because I think you're involved in language teaching. No, she seems to have disappeared. Okay. Alex, we're going to come to you in Kiev. I know that you have two young children, and I know that you also learn a foreign language, English. What's kind of struck a chord with you today? What do you think about what Cassie said about how you could maybe help your daughters improve a foreign language or just even their native language with the type of texts that they're exposed to? You're muted, Alex. We can't hear you. And I'm going to, if you can put yourself on megaphone as well. So if you raise your hand, Alex, we can hear the answer to the question. There we go. I'm going to give you the mic right now.
Okay, you mute me. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you for your information. It was very interesting personally for me as for father, because I have a little daughter, 2 years old, and she is pre-reader, as you said. And as I understand it, it's very important to have a feedback like evidence learning. So she will make some movements and have a feedback from some visuals or sounds, and it will have it will improve her reading skills or speaking skills. So I understood, and I will try to make my own some learning program for her.
You've converted one already. There's one convert for you. There's the proof in the pudding there. Good. Thanks, Alex. Good. We've got another question that's come through. Actually, no, that is you. Kat, do you have something on your mind? You possibly did.
Yeah, I would love to ask about types of text. You could talk about books without any pictures, how beneficial they are in developing imagination, creativity, and cognitive skills, and what is the best time to introduce them to children?
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you asked that question, because I think that the study with eye tracking, where I actually removed all of the extraneous details, something that I really wanted to emphasize was it wasn't completely removing all of the pictures. It was just making sure that the most appropriate content was retained. But I recently did run a replication experiment where I did have a just text condition where there were absolutely no pictures, and children actually performed the worst in this condition. So it was like it's kind of like the Goldilocks effect. It's like too little where it's just text, too much with the most complex pictures. There was like a just right where it was the appropriate pictures that match the text is the version where children learn the most.
Okay. Oh, what about the opposite, like comic books, where you have lots of pictures and just a little bit of text?
I think that the goal, it depends on the goal. So I actually have worked with several international students who said that their primary medium of learning English was actually comic books growing up, but it was because they understood the emotion of the characters and what they were going through. And so I think that if you're at a developmental age where you can truly understand emotions and the narrative and have adult guidance to kind of like walk you through those comic books, then it is beneficial for children's learning. But if this is just for, right, like again, like children in this awkward transition phase of beginning readers, right, first to second grade, where they're not pre-reading, but they're not like the reading is not automatic yet they're expected to read independently in the classroom, sustained silent reading, then maybe the most optimal learning environment isn't something like comic books if they're still trying to develop that fluency and just trying to understand the narrative so they can focus more on the text versus looking at all the pictures. So as long as the pictures are relevant to the storyline, then I'm all for them. But if you look at the actual design of commercially available books, the most popular ones, they're so busy. They have a lot of content that is just not relative to the narrative. And I think that that's just something that needs to be taken into account more.
Yes, so true. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
And it leads us nicely on to the transferability of everything you've covered today, Cassie, from like the L1 to the L2, the first language to the second language. And there's this kind of pedagogical structure. It was in the 1980s from this kind of teaching English as a foreign language, where you actually, in order to teach reading, it's better to present text and pre-reading tasks and a stimulus, the schema, I think they called it, or schema, in order to expose the child to more culturally kind of significant information first before then getting them to read something. So, for example, if you want to teach them about vocabularies or to do with weddings, which maybe is quite a mature topic for a young child, but let's just use that as an example. You would present them maybe with some pictures about a wedding in their culture first, and then begin to weave in the text as you go along. Could you say anything there about how the role that VR could play in terms of first giving them the exposure to a context first, activating the kind of that part of the brain where they recognize that situation, and then feeding in the text as you go along?
Yeah, so I think that VR is going to be one of the most promising technologies for language learning because it gives a completely different environment because it's immersive. It's giving this multimodal input where it's not just visual, but it's also auditory and importantly kinesthetic. So you have this total embodied environment, right? So if, let's say, learning the word for dog, but actually seeing it physically in front of you, building that association, and actually seeing it in different contexts. Whereas on a 2D screen or just, seeing it just the text, it wouldn't be as immersive and give this enriching multimodal input.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And then in true kind of teacher fashion, you have potentially a pre-exposure. So if we're kind of now on this stage designing a potential educational experience to support reading development using VR, we might kind of expose them maybe to a 360 scene, but maybe not too busy, as you said, where they are kind of activating that particular type of language that is then going to follow. You then hit them with a bit of text and then often an activity afterwards in order to reinforce that the structures they've learned. Is there anything that you've done as well, kind of looked at the after stage and actually the retention of language and what they've learned?
Yeah, so the most that my studies have actually looked at in terms of retention and like the actual longitudinal aspects is the study where I looked at actually training attention and looking at neuroplasticity, actual building of new brain connections. So this isn't directly related to language development, but what's commonly known in the literature is that cognitive skills like executive function and neural connectivity are all predictive of later language development. So what I've been finding though is that following these children 1 month later and then 4 months later, the children who were exposed to this combined cognitive stimulation with the physical activity, those effects are the ones that last the longest. Whereas the short bursts where it was sedentary or just repetitive exercise where it wasn't a targeted learning skill, those are the ones that didn't transfer longitudinally.
Wow. Okay. Wow. They're still, no, they're all listening so attentively, but I'm going to put another question out there. Is anybody in here actually learning a foreign language or teaching their child to read? Has this anybody want to talk about that? Because if you do, you can raise your hand. Because I'm interested to know as well how. Oh, we got Matthew. Matthew, you're now on megaphone. You agree?
Yeah, I'm learning. I'm learning. Well, relearning Russian. My native. I grew up learning. I grew up reading. I mean, talking Russian, but I never learned how to read it, and as a result, my actual Russian suffered. But I'm learning it through traditional means, and it's somewhat difficult to relearn it as a result because I see these words, but I don't know exactly what they mean. I have some idea of what they could mean, but nothing exact.
Yeah.
But like, if I could have like something in front of me that'd be easily accessible, that would be pretty cool to have through virtual reality.
So, so let's imagine that Matthew's just turned up to Carnegie Mellon University, yeah? And he's come to you, and that's his issue, and he's looking for a solution. I mean, what's your advice be to him as an individual, or maybe he's a kind of an ed tech designer, he's got a startup, and he's looking to help people in the same boat as him. What would be your first questions to try and investigate how you could help him more?
Well, I would ask him what his traditional methods of learning are. Is it, right? So if it's like something like flashcards, where it's like the English word and then the Russian word, then I would try to figure out a design in VR in which you have to be physically engaged with a type of activity. So I remember learning Spanish in my 7th grade class. Something that my Spanish teacher would do is she would split us up into teams, and she would have the Spanish words written on the whiteboard, and she would tell us the English word, and we had fly swatters, and we would have to swat them on the whiteboard. But it was very physically active and engaging. But I think it was also something that's just a lot more. It's not just the physical activity component, but it's also like fun, right? Like it's it's not just like you're flipping flashcards. Like you're actually physically have to find the word amongst a bunch of distracting words too. So it would be gamified.
Yeah. And Matthew, how do you currently kind of try to train your reading skills or Russian language skills?
Well, I'm through learning to write and reading. Like I'm a
Yes.
like, but reading through like a sort of textbook of this. It's somewhat complicated, but but I'm learning that the writing it's in cursive, but as I just learned the alphabet, I don't necessarily know what I'm writing.
Yes. Yeah. That's interesting. Okay. So I think the key is actually, and as you said with the zone of proximal development stuff, with the kind of motivational and the jar that fills up for the progress, or whether you're talking about actually overexposing or stimulating too much the child or reader's mind, your children, your research experience. We just need to understand more deeply the use, like the individual person, how they learn, what their attention spans are. And if you're a teacher, I appreciate it's difficult, but I guess the first step is just trying to maybe monitor in some way. I mean, how would we touched on this a moment ago? But imagine you're a teacher in a classroom, and I know this is educators in VR events, so many people are going to be educators. But you walk into a classroom, you want to apply some of the things that you've said. what would be the first step without all of the technology and stuff like that? What would you advise them?
So I think that it's like the teaching 101 thing, but I think before I ever teach any class is I always send out some sort of pre-survey just to get a feel of where students lie in terms of their background knowledge, because then I adjust my syllabus and my course to make sure that the content that I'm presenting is not too difficult, but it's not too easy for the entire class, no matter like what content it is. So I think that's something that should always be practiced, but it's not always practiced, especially if you're following like a standardized curriculum where it's like, okay, like grade 8, they should be learning this. But if certain children came from, let's say, other schools, or in grade 7, they didn't learn certain lessons, then they will already be behind going into 8th grade.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, good. So the understanding before you actually hit them with the reams and reams of text. Do we have any more questions? Hello, we've got Bunjo at the back. You're in the UAE and you speak English very well. He doesn't want to talk. No problem. He's uncharacteristically shy this evening. I don't know what's going on. He's tired. Who else have we got in the room? I'm looking at the clock. We've got a few minutes left before we need to wrap up. We can take a few more questions if you've got them. Or Cassie, if you want to offer us any more pearls of wisdom before we depart this beautiful wooden floored stage. But I think what we're going to do is do what we should have done a few weeks ago, Kate, and that's distill everything that you've said today, because everything you've said kind of cuts across what it's like being a parent trying to help your children with reading, educators, researchers, tech, content designers, etc. We're going to try and distill some of those key points and put it on the website so people can access that and just get a kind of a bite-sized understanding of how we can go into this next stage of technology and education, taking account of the pedagogical structures that lay behind it, rather than just walking into a classroom and expecting that what you provide the students is going to work, because maybe it's not. So thank you very much for your advice, your wisdom. We've got your contact details. We'll keep in touch. Maybe you can come back next year and tell us how it's all going with all your projects. Do you want to say something, Kate?
Yeah, I have one more question.
Sure.
What do you think? Is it a good idea for an adult to start to read using kids' books? What do you think? Would you love to learn a foreign language through kids' books? Because people say they're quite simple. The pictures are very useful for understanding, and so you raise your motivation because you understand a lot.
Yeah, actually, so for adults, I honestly think that I would actually recommend animated series. There's a lot, because just because there's like the social emotional development and maturity that can kind of understand these types of emotions that's more developmentally appropriate, that would be engaging for an adult. Because I'm trying to think about like give it like the content in children's storybooks, how that might not be the most engaging things for adults to interact with. But actually, like, I think having animated series that are in a certain language that you're trying to learn, but having your first language as the subtitles is actually a really good way to pick up language as an adult, because then it's both engaging, but you're also exposed to the language you're trying to learn.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
And what you're saying as well is, we're kind of bombarded with different methods to learn a language, whether that be a kind of native one to help younger learners, or foreign language. But actually, we need to just, I think, maybe focus more on the art of learning before actually learning. What's out there, what's the structures that we could use to support us. In the same way, if you're going to prepare for a sports event, you don't just kind of wake up in the morning and go straight to the gym and start hitting the weights. You're going to be warming up and understanding the processes behind it. So I think that's what you've helped me understand a bit better as well, Cassie. So that's priceless advice. We've got time for one more question. Come on. Anybody out there? Bunjo, I won't look at you, Bunjo. Bunjo, no, he doesn't want it. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I think Karen's just entered the room. Is that you, Karen? The Karen? Do you want to say something, Karen? If you do, you can raise your hand, the bottom right. Oh, yes. Go on. There we go. We'll give you the mic. If you just click the raise hand button. And I think this is the Karen Alexander that is supporting all the great work that Cassie's doing. If you want to say something and promote XR Connected, please do. I can't see you're muted. What you need to do is press, oh, there we go. I'm going to give you the mic. Awaiting consent. Tension rising. Is she going to accept? Yes.
Okay. All right. Great. Yes. Now I think it's on. No, I apologize both to you, Michael, and especially to Cassie for being late to this session. Yeah, I am really impressed by the work that Cassie is doing, and obviously it will have a lot of different applications. This sort of research can really benefit the XR community as a whole, and it's important to have these, really rigorous research done to back up a lot of the things that we hear about the benefits of XR. And so, I've really been excited to work with Cassie and to learn about her work, and I look forward to seeing where she takes it next. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Well, what a beautiful positive note to finish on. Not to say the other stuff wasn't positive, because it very much was. But thank you very much to everybody for coming. You've got Cassie's contact details, I think, appeared on the final slide there. We're going to put that in the live streamed YouTube video content. So if you want to reach out to Cassie and understand a bit more about the work she's doing or set up future collaborations, I'm sure she'll be interested to hear anything with regards to education. Reach out. You got a round of applause from Matthew and everybody else. Donna, we're going to take a photo. I can see you positioning yourself strategically in front of the
I just took one of the two of you, but do you want to take one of everyone? If you want to get people on the stage, I'm happy to take one of everyone.
I'll tell you what, they're a good bunch. We're going to take off the stage blocker and we're going to let them on the stage. Should we do that?
Excellent. Yeah, let's go for it.
Toggle stage blocker. There we go. Everybody, you can now access the stage. You lucky people. It's not often we do this, but you've been so well behaved.
Yeah, this is awesome, you guys. Everybody.
So let's get some emojis, preferably positive, hearts and claps, smiley faces.
I can't look behind me. So is everybody on stage now?
We're missing one.
Most of them, yeah.
Okay. So emojis, I'll get the camera going in 3, 2, 1. Karen, move a little bit to your right because you snuck behind somebody.
Oh,
I
okay.
think that was yeah, perfect. A little bit more. Okay. You're right behind Cassie. Just a little bit more. No, there. Perfect. Okay, I'm taking it right now. And there we go. Let me just. Okay. Don't anybody move. I'm going to take it again. There we go. That's
Finger hurting, Donna.
Okay, there we go. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Donna.
I appreciate it.
Yay.
Thanks, everybody. Well, toilets are over there to your right and the bars to the left. So I will see you very soon. Thanks for coming, Cassie. Thanks again for your time. I'll drop you an email later with the maybe we can distill everything you said into a few bullet points.